Our next speaker is Elliot Kember. I think I pronounced that right. He's well known for wrestling helicopters and flying crocodiles. That's the least what he could say about himself. And he will talk a little bit about a lot of tools for developers. So please, a warm welcome and a warm applause for Elliot.
Better. Hi everybody. Obviously I came in costume today. This isn't what I normally wear, but at least this way I got my Halloween costume all set for Halloween. So that's a plus. The hat is. They offered to give me one of these ones, but I think I'll stick with mine. So we're at ArrrrCamp, right? And today I'm going to be speaking to you about the war on users. And it sounds like a kind of a weird thing to be talking about because, nobody ever said, let's have a war on users. Nobody ever said, let's do anything to our users except totally respect everything that they say and take everything that they give us as valid. So, to start off, what are we doing here, all of us, at ArrrrCamp? What are we all? Put your hand up if you're a developer. Everybody. Fantastic. And put your hands up if you do Rails. Yeah, I should hope so. It's a Rails conference. So, that's great. Now, what I've found when I've been building Rails sites is a lot of the time what I'm building is something that ships HTML. It puts HTML on your screen, and you view that HTML, and you click on things, and stuff happens, and you read stuff, or there's images, or whatever, but a lot of the stuff is HTML, right? I think a lot of us here in this room are heavily invested in the future of HTML, and HTML5, and all these tools that are going on in the browser and on mobile, in order to give information to people, essentially, is all we're doing. And a lot of the time what we're trying to do is make our HTML smaller. See? Pretty good. Visual pun. So this is a bit of a less technical talk than the previous Y Combinator one. I got about 5 minutes of the way through and I was like, I don't know what's going on anymore. So we're trying to make our HTML smaller as the key idea because there's people on mobile, there's people on low bandwidth connections, nobody likes waiting for things. And this is all totally true. I mean, we've got the system nowadays where we've got super duper fast computers, really fast computers, and other fast computers down the other end. And we've got this like tiny little link that combines the two. Right? And a bottleneck here is very, very obvious. I'm going to take this off because it doesn't really fit. Okay, that's not going to work. The bottleneck here is really obvious, right? It's this network. And we all know this, and this is something we're trying to get rid of. So we're trying to sprite our images, we're trying to make things a little bit more optimized, we're trying to minify, gzip, and compress, and all these things are fantastic. All these things are really, really, really good. And everybody knows this. This is a well-established fact, but I think we need to take like a little step back. And I don't know if it'll show, but yeah, there's a pixel, see? That totally worked. What we need to remember, I think, is that all we're doing with what we do with this stuff is putting pixels on a screen. And then people interact with those pixels, and then there are different pixels. And as soon as you realize that that's the one thing that we're trying to do here, you start to be able to get a little bit more flexibility with how we do this. So the gap between native and mobile web and full web and like Mac apps that are actually just web views for websites, the line becomes a little bit more blurred. You can build anything, I think, as long as it puts pixels on the screen in a reliable way and allows you to interact with it well. It allows the user to basically get in and get out as quickly as possible to achieve the tasks they need to achieve in the time that they want to achieve them in. So this is our little pixel here, and that's what we need to... Can you believe they let me get this through customs? I didn't say anything. Next year it's going to be a metal one. I'll see if they try that. So we've been told to love our users. We've been told that our users are our most valuable asset, right? We can't exist without our users. Our users are everything to us. And we love them, and we listen to things that they tell us, and we do things with them in mind, and when they ask for suggestions, we do the things that they tell us to do. But I think this is fucked, really. I think what we need to do is hate our users. We need to hate our users. We need to want to get rid of our users, essentially. We need them to hang around for as little time as possible so that they don't resent us. Because the longer they stick around getting frustrated with our stuff, the more they're going to hate us. So we have to hate them first in order to get them out the door so they like us. Now, this doesn't mean that you should be rude to your users. Let me just state that. This is actually a very interesting thing because I think the more you hate your users, the more you realize that being really, really nice to them is totally a trick to make them like you more. So I think we should use that in our arsenal of ways to make our users like us without having to like them. So I've written up a little task list for us. And this is to do with our users. I want you to lie and cheat and steal. It sounds kind of weird, right? Sounds kind of shady, kind of black hat. Sounds like the kind of things that, we didn't get told to do. Now, the reason I say steal is the only one up there that kind of is a little bit weird. And I had to sort of think about this for a little while before I realized why you should be stealing from your users. And there's a very good reason. And the reason is because we want their money, don't we? We want their money. So we need to steal their money from them and give it to us so we have it. And that's perfect. So the way that we're going to do that is kind of underhanded, right? It's kind of like not the way, please, I hope we've got a good service. No, the way is to provide the absolute best service so that they love you and want to give you their money. And that doesn't mean you have to like them. So let's go through a few key facts about our enemy, our users. Well, one key fact about our users, and a fact that anybody who has ever done any usability testing will always tell you, is that people are remarkably stupid. Even incredibly intelligent people can do the most, stupid things when you put a mouse and a computer screen in front of them. There'll be a buy button, and they'll say, how do I buy this? And you have to say, well, you have to click the buy button. And eventually they get to it. Now, there is this sort of baseline level of user ability when it comes to this stuff, right? And I think if you hit that lowest common denominator, if you hit that lowest point where people can, really get things wrong, essentially, I believe you get most people. So here are some. They might be a little bit small. Here are some usability maxims. These are Lund's usability maxims from 1997. This guy Arnie Lund, and there's kind of a lot there. We can kind of go through them, but the important ones to me are: every action should have a reaction. Things that look the same should act the same. Keep it simple, which we all know. Basically, you should write all these down. I'll wait. These are very, very important. And as developers, usually this isn't our responsibility, right? We don't have to do the front-end stuff. We don't have to care about the pixels, right? If someone else does that, we just put the HTML and it kind of works. It's fine. But I think we need to know this stuff because there's a lot more developers doing UI stuff. There's a lot more developers doing interaction. And there's a lot more developers sort of filling in the parts that the designers do. So they'll make something pretty, and we'll, actually make it work and real. And a lot of the time, we get lumped with this job. And so if we don't know enough about these things, I hope you're still writing. If we don't know enough about these things, then decisions get made that kind of suck for the user, and that's the last thing we want. Now, a really good example of this, I was talking to a guy recently who was, I think he was an electronical engineer student. And he was talking about Angry Birds. Everybody knows this game. And he said that Angry Birds is a terrible game. He said it's awful. I hate it. And I said, why is that? This guy's pretty intelligent. He's probably got a really good reason. He says, it's a terrible physics simulator. And I had to stop for a minute and think, how did he think this was a physics simulator? He's like, when the things go, they don't bounce properly, and fluid dynamics, and I could make a better one. I sort of said, well, you should do it then. You should make a better one. You should really, really go out there and do it. And, he said, it's quite complicated. It takes a lot of time. And that's the point, right? For one thing, it takes a lot of time to make a really, really good physics simulator. And for two, it might not be as fun. And this is kind of the point that I had to tell this guy, because he was a science nerd, right? He probably understood the Y Combinator talk. That's how smart he was. And I had to sort of explain to him, this isn't a physics simulator, this is a game. And sometimes we have to change things from what we expect them to be, or from their ideal state, into something that appeals more to our actual users. And this is something that, as developers, I've forgotten. I keep forgetting. I keep putting people in front of apps that I've built, and they get stuck on the easiest things. And I have to imagine that from their point of view. So I'm viewing it from the data forwards, right? I'm viewing it like, this is a model, and when this updates, there's a thing that sends an email, and all this stuff happens. But to actually flip that on its head and view it from the user side is a really, really, really important thing to do, because at the end of the day, pixels on a screen. My favorite thing, and I don't think it's sufficiently covered in usability stuff, is a fudge factor. And that's, that's my symbol for it. It's a symbol for a lot of things, but it can be this one too. Now, this is where the lying comes in, I think. This is where we have to falsify our information for our users. We have to, instead of representing data that exists on a server, we have to represent an action that has been taken by the user, because the user is the person we're trying to please. My favorite example of this, and the first thing that I ever came across, and this will date me, was the dig button, the asynchronous dig button, where you click it and an AJAX call, a synchronous call gets made that digs a story. Now, the number at the top where it says one dig, some of you will remember this was a news site many years ago. The number at the top updates when you hit the button. That change hasn't been saved to the server. The server doesn't even know about it. Any number of things could go wrong, but the number updates and the user goes, great, something has happened. Something has happened on my computer when I did this thing. Now, this is everywhere in computers now. We have all these loading bars and progress things and everything that masks the application that you're about to use until it's ready to receive input. And this is really interesting because this is perceived speed. This is not actual speed. This application, and I'm looking at you, Photoshop, could take a long time to load. And it doesn't really matter because something is happening. I can go and get a cup of tea, and I can come back and Photoshop will be loaded and fully ready for me to use. Nothing after that point will take too long because everything's loaded into memory. And this is something with software. A lot of this in software. Perceived speed is very easy, in desktop software especially, because you load it into memory and everything's there. You can have a 700 megabyte program or a 2 gigabyte program, Photoshop, and everything is loaded into memory before you start using it. Now, this is a quote by Blaise Pascal, and unfortunately it's taken completely and utterly out of context, but this is a quote from a guy who was a 17th century mathematician, physicist, inventor, writer, and philosopher. This guy invented probability with Fermat and the syringe. He also invented the roulette wheel, but he was trying to make a perpetual motion machine. Either way, he's a pretty badass guy, and this is something he said that I'm taking out of context. So we like to be deceived. We like to be lied to. We like things to make us feel like things are happening, even if they're not. So one word that gets thrown around a lot is intuitive, like an intuitive interface. This word is wrong, of course. A person or a dog can be intuitive, and an interface can be intuitable, but convention states that we use the word intuitive for an interface. There are a lot of theories about this. Sometimes it's familiar versus learnable, but really, everything is learned, and everything is intuitable. The interesting thing about this is that we're really good at picking new stuff up if we've seen, I'm going to stop waving this sword around, if we've seen similar things before. Because as humans, we're just glorified pattern matching machines. That's all we are. Well, we're a couple of other things, but we're like meat computers for pattern recognition. And a nice example of this is sheet music. Does anyone read sheet music? Does anyone know what that's from? Good, neither do I. It's one of those things where we've devised a very complex system for expressing a very complex thing. The music that this is expressing is a complex thing to hear and a very complex thing to play. But in devising a system of notation for this, and the same can be said about dance, there's a similar set of notation where every step is annotated in a certain way. It's always consistent, the spacing is readable, and once you read, there are people who can read this and play. Can anyone sight read music? There are people that can do this like live. They can read this and the notes come out on the keyboard. It's ridiculous. But it's a function of advanced pattern recognition. And once you see that chords are matched a certain way, the neurons in your brain, I'm guessing, that are responsible for matching those to actual actions, they get wrapped in faster, I did this in psychology 10 years ago, they get wrapped in faster membranes, and the path through the brain gets sort of learned, and it becomes a physical response. You can feel the way that a chord looks and feels on the keyboard. You don't even have to think. Another interesting one is the keyboard. Now, this is a thing my friend gave me. It's a Dvorak keyboard cover. Does anyone type Dvorak? Nice. It's like 2 people. Everybody knows about it? Yeah, well, it's significantly faster than QWERTY. It's ridiculously faster than QWERTY. It was patented in 1936 by Dr. August Dvorak, and he lives in Seattle. He is a distant relative of Dvorak, the composer, which is probably how you're supposed to pronounce it. And he invented this keyboard layout. And he was like writing stuff down and figuring out how words were related to each other and keys in the English language and how they connect to each other. He came up with this. This keyboard layout was banned from typing competitions because his students were getting 9 out of 10 of the prizes in typing competitions at the time, typewriters. The QWERTY keyboard, of course, being designed to stop typewriters from jamming because the little hammers would hit each other if you typed two keys that were close together. So it was designed to slow you down, so the little mechanical bits. Of course, now this doesn't make any sense, and this is a massive holdover. It's a total joke because we have something much, much better. Now, recently, people have used computer algorithms to try and figure out new keyboard layouts, and the hilarious thing is they don't differ that much from actual Dvorak keyboard layout. There are a few. There's Colmac. There's a bunch of ones that claim to be better, but Dvorak is the one. I tried to learn this over the course of a week. The same time, I think I had given up on coffee, and I was doing a few things to myself, and it didn't make this any easier. If you're going to do this, give it like 2 weeks, but all you have to do is like write one email a day, because that's the kind of speed we're talking about. You feel immediately how much better it is for your hands. It really is. The other one that's really interesting is I don't know if everybody's seen this or noticed this, but this is the iOS 6 dialer, and I hate it. But a phone keypad and a calculator keypad are the opposite way around. And nobody actually knows why this is. There are a few theories, but the underlying thing is we don't know. Something happened. It could have been the rotary phones with the numbers and the ones. There's a few things, but not many people actually notice this because the use case for these two things is quite different. When you try and type your own phone number on a calculator, you're like, oh, it's weird and upside down. This is quite strange. Keynote. So, we should come up with some 3 rules, I think, because everything needs 3 rules. And the rules for this are going to be simple, consistent, and responsive. Simple, I think, makes sense to everybody here because it's easier to make. Everything is easier. Consistent is an interesting one. I'm going to take the iPhone as my example. It's a shape that is probably recognizable to most of the people in this room, although this one is now out of date because it's quite short. Now, on the iPhone's 3.5 inch, something like that, display, we have a screen. And here is one of my applications, Twitter. And it's running, and this is a tweet from a friend of mine. Off screen, to the user, in the user's mind, there are more screens displaying. These may not actually exist in the phone's memory or display, but this is where we came from, and this is where we're going. And these are always on these sides, and this is directionality, and this can't be broken. The second you break this, it's very, very confusing. I came from the left, I'm going to the right, suddenly something's on the right, I don't know where the hell I am, I'm going to quit this and play Angry Birds. We also have, at the bottom, we have a keyboard, and at the top, we have the notification center. The keyboard is always at the bottom. You cannot mess with the keyboard. You cannot change the keyboard is at the bottom. We had an interesting one of this, where recently we made an iOS app that has a keyboard on each end. We wanted to make something so that a user could talk to another user, and they could translate, and the messages would show up. Of course, 5 minutes into figuring out how we did this in Objective-C, we realized this is impossible, you can't mess with the keyboard, and you can't use different languages, so we did it in JavaScript. The screen is more intelligent than you think. Every touch is actually registered 20 pixels or thereabouts on the iPad below where you're actually touching. So if anybody's tried to use an iPad upside down, it's really difficult. The keys don't press, you press the wrong things. Of course, the pop-ups are all wrong, but stuff is really difficult. So we had to translate every touch by 20 pixels. And this is directly related to the shape of the finger. The only device, the only thing, the only interaction mechanism we have for the iPad. The thing was designed for it. And it's designed completely, it doesn't make any sense for everything to be shifted downwards until you realize that people are going to be using this. So there's more things going on here. There's some overlays that sort of go where the keyboard goes, and they're for different things. And these are context-specific, of course. This one is a drop-down for a time, 4 hours, 20 minutes, I believe. There's an action sheet. There's an HTML picker below it, and then, of course, there's the keyboard. Over the top of this, and always over the top, you get notifications that appear or slide down from the top. All of these have a place to go to and a place that they come from. And they're never anywhere else, and they're always in those places, and that's really, really reassuring. And over the top, of course, you have the lock screen featuring the Croatian sensation Mislav. And this is an exploded diagram of how our phone's UI looks. And it's really, really bad to break things like this. It's really nice on iOS because you have this really, really consistent. I'm going to stop saying really, really in a minute. I really, really am. you have this consistent UI where things are always where you think they are, and things are always where you expect. Nothing flies in from hidden containers. There's no, things hiding up the phone's sleeve that pop out from unexpected locations. Everything is where it should be. The last one, I think, of those 3 rules was responsive. And this is a really, really interesting... Oh, fuck it, I did it again. This is an interesting number because the theory goes that anything you do has to be represented by the thing that you do it to in under 50 milliseconds. That's pretty short. It's not unattainable, but it is pretty short. And this sucks on the web if you're doing anything with a new page, because you have to load the new page, blank the current page, and then display the next page. So we're actually putting that bottleneck in the way of our UI and the way of our interactions. And this is wrong. This is old technology. You're using an HTML spec that was designed long before we even thought we're going to be putting images in this thing. The question you're all asking is, does this apply to me? I am a developer. I do not care about people. I want to put machines next to other machines and make them talk to each other with commands like this. Right? Fucking FFmpeg every time. I'm like, let's convert some video. I know what some of those words mean. No, I have no idea. This is all too common, I find. With complicated programs often comes a complicated interface. And there are some simple things. This is probably a really simple thing. FFmpeg is capable of some incredibly complicated stuff. Subtitling, reframing, doing sorts of things with resampling and getting the file down to a size such that it fits on a CD and you can give it to your friends. But it's a complicated thing to use, and I think there's like 5 people in the world who actually know how to use all of the bits of it. The guy who made it and 4 of his friends. This is not very good for people who are new to it. The manual page alone is hundreds of pages, hundreds and hundreds of lines. And it's hard if you're trying to use this to do something. And this is where we get this concept of yak shaving, right? I want to convert this video, so I'm going to use FFmpeg. So I'm going to read the manual, and I'm going to learn about vcodec MPEG-4. And then it's 4 in the morning, and it's like a week later, and you have no idea why you started doing this. You get distracted from the original task. The idea is, with the phrase yak shaving, I don't know if you're familiar, but at some point you will end up shaving a yak. And there's some reason you need the hair to do this, and then you this, that, and the other thing, and then finally you convert this video. Someone comes along and says, what are you doing? And you say, well, I'm shaving a yak. The other example I really, really love is OpenID. OpenID is my least favorite thing in the entire world. I think it's awful. It's the solution to a real problem, which is like username and passwords, basically. It's people getting their shit stolen. And OpenID was a way of saying, okay, let's make a distributed system where everything is great and all these services talk to each other, and you just have to put in a URL to log in. And that's where I think it all fell down. Because I was trying to explain to someone, no, you put a URL in to log in, and they went, I don't know what that means. First, I don't know what a URL is. Second, I don't know what mine is. And third, I don't know why I'm putting it in to log in anywhere, because that's not me, that URL. It's also someone else's. And mine was like 80 characters long. It was like google.com/ua/id/ some other stuff. I don't know what it is. So I was like, okay, we'll put in some login buttons. I was like, great, one-click login. Of course it wasn't, because you had the login with Google button. You had the login with someone else's OpenID button. You had the, set up your own OpenID. And once you're in, which one of those did you press? And you've got 5 different buttons to press on logging in. It is a solution. It's a solution to this problem, but it came with far more problems than it solved. And a lot of people implemented this and then de-implemented it when it just caused so much confusion. So OpenID sucks, or rather, sucked. Now this is something this is something interesting that my friend Alex McCaw wrote. He is a blogger with a subtle network. Many of you may know it or hate it. And he wrote this. He works at Stripe. But he wrote this JavaScript for the CMS part of their application. So this is just them. This is internal. This probably doesn't look any good, this UI. But this is what they were using to post things. And I sort of looked at this and went, looks pretty good, I guess. It's posting a thing. And then I thought, hang on. There's a really interesting line in here. This is creating a UID. This is quite cool. And all the lights started to flick on, and I sort of went, this is actually really cool. This is a cool bit. This is the cool line of that snippet. This is the one where, instead of relying on what the server says, this is the one that says, okay, browser, fine. You create the thing, and I'll store it under that. And what that meant was, when you drag an image into this, it's a text area, it will actually upload that image, give you a bit of text, put that text where you are, and then that is the URL for that image while it uploads in the background. He does all his error checking and stuff in a list of uploads on the right, so you can do multiple ones at once. But the important thing is, the user is not blocked. And blocking the user is the worst thing that you can possibly do if you want to get them out the door on time. So this was interesting to me because I thought, right, we can actually do this for, for things that people are in the process of writing, things that aren't saved, things that are ephemeral. This is making the computer work for us. Of course, there are a lot of JavaScript frameworks that do similar things to this in that they show state on the client without actually having replicated it potentially to the server. Perhaps it's stored in local storage, perhaps it's on its way. Regardless, these are all fantastic. We've got Backbone, Spine, Ember, Railway, Darby, Locomotive. And I think decreasing order of how many people use them, although Ember might be above Spine, I don't know. These three at the bottom are quite... Yehuda, is that about right? What's that? Ember is higher than Spine. I'll tell Alex, he'll appreciate that. That's good. The Darby is cool because it uses racer to synchronize data between the server and client. Locomotive is quite like Rails, and I think Railway is quite a lot like Rails as well. Where people are trying to apply the same thinking as in Rails apps to front-end apps with varying degrees of success, because here was where I was when I looked at the Darby documentation. So you've got your hello.js, which is used on the client, I think, and the server. The server one, which is just used on the server, but includes that, and add water and internal server error. This is so cool, man. This is the cutting edge. This is the broken edge of web development. I mean, I don't want to harsh on them. I'm sure it's great, but I came back a day later and it was the same. It's broken. Broken. Oh, well, it's in beta, I guess. The one I really like and I'm interested in is Meteor. Has anyone tried Meteor? Awesome, like one person, cool. Meteor is really cool. Meteor is really interesting. But you've heard of it? Anybody? Bueller? Like 3, okay. Meteor is this interesting thing where they've taken everything away from making a web app or site. And they've replaced it with sort of a DSL, where everything goes into the middle through this magical black box, and everything comes out the other end on the browser. When you push and deploy, the browsers, all of the users get reloaded and updated, which is interesting if you break anything and they can't get back in. But you get this one file that runs on the client and on the server. So this is if Meteor.is client. This is the stuff that runs in the browser. So you've got a sort of a set of functions, and all these, they look pretty good, but... And I haven't read far enough into this to really know what I'm talking about, but the context of inside these functions is amazing, because they check these things and they will update in much the same way that Ember does. If things change, everything gets updated in the browser. Now this is also if stuff gets updated on the server or by someone else. If someone else saves something, goes to the server, it gets pushed through a WebSocket. The WebSocket is taken care of. It's built into Meteor. It's the way that it's the way that it's built. They sort of said, everybody who's building standard and conventional web applications using a server application with a Rails app and an Ember application with a front end, it's kind of the hard way. And I kind of agree, sort of. I don't think it's the be-all and end-all of web development, and I don't think this is what everybody's going to be doing in 10 years, but it is a really interesting way of doing this stuff. So you write your templates, and you write your server bit, and you deploy it onto their servers. They provide hosting at the moment. And it runs, and I think there are 3 files. You've got an HTML file, which is this, and a JavaScript file and a CSS file, and that is your Meteor project. They have been funded, I believe, to the tune of millions of dollars to build this thing. It's working and in progress. There are a lot of sort of changes going on, but it is quite cool. I wouldn't say whether or not you should use it in production. Probably not. But it does seem a really interesting thing. And I find that stuff from this always gets propagated into other applications. For example, we were thinking of doing something, and I was going to build it and have it ready for this talk, but I'm very lazy, and I didn't. And it was sort of the idea of HTML files. There are a lot of front-end developers and designers building static HTML sites. This is something we're building an app to address. So we thought, let's make a JavaScript script that runs on your server, compiles all your files into one JavaScript file, and then gets loaded with your HTML file. Overloads URL changing push state and renders the contents of those files without having to push them to the client. They're all in this JavaScript file. It works a little. I had a working implementation of it. It kind of sucked. I forgot about the titles. That wasn't in there. All the headers had to be the same, but it was interesting to build something where it takes the idea of what we're doing and it turns it, and it makes it into responsive sites automatically. To go back to our objectives, though, we have to lie about state, cheat by faking it, and steal all of the money. And these are the things that we should be doing. These are the things that we should be doing for client sites and for projects. But we also are the maker of tools. We are also the makers of tools. We are the guys that make the things that other people use, that front-end developers use, that designers use. We build those things. And if we build them in the right way, it's possible for us to create something that is not sort of hanging on to 20 or 30 years of HTML spec and HTTP and all these awful things that we have to put up with to get our pixels across to people. We can build things that are revolutionary and that change the way that we make web applications. We're the makers of tools. And this is, I think, fundamental, and something we forget, is that we can change this stuff. We don't have to be bound to serving up HTML files. We don't have to put our UI over the network. We can put data over the wire and serve everything, have all our layout locally. And as time goes on, I think with Moore's law and bandwidth improvements and computer speed improvements and mobile improvements and parser and rendering and everything, this has only become, going to become more and more the thing that we're focusing on, because you've still got point-to-point communication, you've still got that pesky old speed of light thing. There are still a lot of things that you can't get out of the way. Now, one example of this that I really wanted to do today was, I've never launched something on stage before, but I've built a free app for everybody called Anvil. Who uses POW? Anybody use POW? Okay, for those of you who don't, it's a zero configuration rack server that runs locally on your Mac, and I built a UI for it, and it's a Mac app. There it is. anvilformac.com, which unfortunately is not live, so I'm going to do something incredibly risky, and this is totally not going to. Do it on stage, they said. It'll be fine, they said. It'll be cool. Well, regardless, Anvil is a tool for people who use POW. I built it because I wanted it. I built it because my designer wanted it. And this, I think, is the reason I'm interested in this stuff, is because I have a designer. I have a tame designer who does what I said. That does what I say. And he has to use these tools, and he has to use POW, and he has to use things that he doesn't understand, like run commands in the terminal. And they terrify him. And they should terrify me. If he is putting up with something, if he has to do something he doesn't understand, that means I'm putting up with it. That means I'm doing probably some unnecessary things that I could likely automate, that I could likely build a UI for. Oh my God. That's going to take forever, isn't it? Okay, well, that'll keep going. But I'll see if I can show you the app. There it is. Those are our POW sites. And if I bring up that one, on the right screen. This is what the site would have looked like if that had worked, my live demo. So this is something that we've been building, and it's something where Yehuda is doing something interesting with Rails.app. It's where you can build an environment that doesn't depend on the computer, and you can build something where you have a UI and you have an application that wraps the thing that you're trying to do. This is with things like Bundler, all of these things where we're trying to abstract away from the computer, abstract away from the dependencies on system Ruby and installing gems with sudo, these awful things. We also can do this with UI. And it's important to be able to create a UI for a computer that wraps around the core things that are happening inside, that represents it in a way that we can understand, with visual metaphors that make sense in a visual world. So hopefully the idea is that more people will build things like this, that we as humans and other humans and people who are not developers can understand, use, and consume, that people can access. POW is very interesting because it allows you to host static sites. And this is cool because we can have short URLs for our sites and we don't have to use MAMP. MAMP is like the worst thing ever. The other thing that we're building, sorry, I'm promoting all my stuff, but we're building an app called Hammer that some people may have heard of. This is our new site that we've just launched today. It's coming soon, it's in review, and that's something we're building. So this is where front-end applications and front-end developers can benefit from the stuff that we're doing. And we're trying to do that by proving it. We're trying to make this happen. Now, does anybody have any more questions? Any questions at all? About UI, about front-end, about anything? I don't know how I'm doing for time, actually. got nothing. Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming to this talk and for coming to ArrrrCamp, and I'd like to thank Ghent and Belgium for hosting us. Big round of applause for Ghent and for Belgium. I brought a parrot, but it unfortunately sprung a leak, so they don't have a scale on the website when you buy these, just if anybody's interested. Thanks so much.
I just have two small announcements. The first one is that this afternoon there's a little switch with tomorrow. So Laurent will be switched with Ryan tomorrow afternoon. So Ryan will take his place in the upper deck at 2:20, and Laurent will take his place tomorrow. And then a small thing, because our next speaker in the other room is stuck in traffic. I don't know if Jacob is